I'm Lara Land, somatic coach and yoga teacher trainer, and this is the Beyond Trauma podcast. What a couple of years we have had. The challenges continue to grow, and more of us are experiencing some level of traumatic stress. My commitment here is to bring you the most up-to-date insights on exactly how trauma affects our mind, body, spirit system, and how we can work with our bodies to soften its impacts. You will be hearing from trauma survivors and researchers, and together, we are going to incorporate what they have to teach us to heal ourselves and promote the well-being of all those around us. Here we go. It's out! The Essential Guide to Trauma-Sensitive Yoga is now available everywhere books are sold. This is the book for every yoga teacher, studio, and practitioner who wants to incorporate an inclusive practice to yoga. It's available on my website, laraland.us, and everywhere books are sold. If you're loving this podcast, you are going to love this book. Hello, my friends. If you're listening to this, we are in spring. We made it. Springtime. And lots of really good, exciting things coming up. Please make sure to check out my website, laraland.us, for upcoming trainings and workshops. I'm going to be May in Rentham, Massachusetts, doing an in-person trauma-informed yoga teacher training. And I'll be doing another one at Omega Institute, beautiful institute in Rhinebeck, upstate New York, in August. So keep checking those out. Lots of events for you. Today, I have a very exciting guest. I know I always say it, but I really vet my guests. So today I have on Annie Chen, and I have on Annie to talk to us about, yes, wait for it, attachment theory. Everyone's talking about attachment theory, right? What's your attachment style? And I really wanted to get into attachment style, what happens if we've had trauma in life to our attachment style, and what does this mean for our social connection, our relationship with others, and how we deal with stress. I mean, isn't this the core of life, right? Of life. Annie is absolutely fantastic. I'm a huge fan. She's an author, a therapist, a consultant, and a coach. She holds 2 master's degrees in counseling and psychology with over 17 years dedicated to studying the mind, nervous system, and relationships. Annie has developed a unique approach to relationships and working with people. Her work integrates research from neuroscience to help clients navigate the complexities of relationships and emotional safety. Annie maintains a practice seeing individuals and couples in Berkeley, California, and virtually. Her book's The Attachment Theory Workbook, which I am working on, and I Want to Connect, which I blurbed for, have inspired over 100,000 people to work towards healthy relationships and promote a deeper understanding of the mind-body connection. You can learn more about Annie at anniechen.net or follow her on Instagram. And like I said, this is a very special episode. We're really getting to the heart of what we all want to do, have better relationships and not get so stressed. So if you like this episode, please make sure to rate and write a little review so people can find it. Here we go. There we go, Annie. Thanks so much for making the time to speak with me when you have such a busy time with this book coming out.
Oh, you're so welcome, Laura. I am very happy to be here and chat with you about the book and what else, it might be interesting about relationships and the nervous system.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've been looking for someone for a while that could come on and talk to us about relationships, attachment theory, social connection, and the nervous system. And of course, how trauma and early childhood trauma might, impact our relationships later in life. And then, of course, what we can do about it. So, and your books cover all of that. So I was really excited when you said that you would come on, and we had some back and forth, which I thought was really great because you were very interested in what am I interested in? And I thought that was really beautiful. And like I've told you, I'm really interested in your work. So I read both your new book that's coming out in the spring, and your other book, the Attachment Theory Workbook, which I've been working on for my own attachment theory. So I have lots of questions on my own attachment style. But I thought maybe we would start with just like, why is this important to you? Why is social connection so important? Why is everyone talking about attachment style?
Ooh, why is I think people have started talking about attachment styles since the book Attached came out. And that really, I think, opened the doors to talking about this idea of fundamentally attachment theory says that things that happen to you, the way that you experienced your childhood and the care you received in your childhood really set things up emotionally and around your stress resilience in a way that is very, very formative for the rest of your life. And it impacts how you trust people, how you collaborate with people and use people in times of stress, how I think just natively your body handles stress, and whether, you're in a state where you can feel like you feel cared for by other people and you can feel empathy for other people, or whether you're in kind of like more low grade stress states or sometimes even more acute stress states, and that cuts off your ability to connect. Let me just pare that down so that I'm answering your question. Why are we talking about attachment theory? Well, attachment theory opened the doors for us to really realize how important, those formative childhood experiences were and what tracks they put us down when it comes to our relationship behaviors.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm hearing like how we see the world, how we perceive others as being safe or unsafe.
Yes, absolutely. Safety has a lot to do with it. And safety in relationships is very much the core of attachment theory. So, stress, safety in relationships.
Yeah. And I think also since that book on loneliness came out and the studies around how devastating loneliness is for our physical well being, even
Hmm.
and our lifespan, I think there might be a connection there, right? Because if we're not comfortable with social connection or we feel like people are a threat, that could lead to more loneliness. It seems like a lot of young people, I'm working in a school right now, and the teens, like there is a bit of isolation and less social connection going on.
Mm. You said, sorry, less or more?
Like less, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it seems like people are in their devices. Young people are a little bit afraid to look each other in the eye. And even in my generation, I see, a lot of stress around conversations, right? Around having normal conflict. It seems like we're in a bit of a epidemic where we can't really face conflict with each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I have some theories about that. And who really knows? Is it more than previous generations or less? I certainly think that yeah, I think how those early years and how we were raised and the generations that are coming up, and how much care and attention they got or are getting has a lot to do with setting up the rest of society and culture and how we do things. I think even if things are going in that direction because of I think how they were foundationally set up 20, 30, 40 years ago, if that makes sense. I do think that there is something inside of us that still reaches for some degree of connection, that it's just, almost like a plant that grows towards the sunlight, and that there can be a lot of injuries, but it's always going to just try to grow in that direction.
Mm. Yeah, so we are as humans, we need to connect, we want to connect. I mean, I imagine that evolutionary wise, we needed our people around us. I know that, we are one of the few animals that is so vulnerable for so long.
Hmm. Yes, when we're born, absolutely. I just think there's so much evidence around us that we are primed, as human creatures to connect. Like you said, there's Harvard's 85-year long longitudinal study on happiness, which the TLDR on that is the quality of your relationships that you have really determine your long term happiness. There's studies on neuroimaging and the brain about how our default when the brain is when you're not doing a task, the brain is set up to basically think about itself and in relation to others, and so it's a very relational kind of mode that is the default. Yeah, there's those studies you mentioned about loneliness and how detrimental it is for our health. And so I just altogether there is just so much evidence that this is a core part of who we are. And it's not just, a nice to have. It's actually what we should be, I think, revolving our society around.
Wow. Yeah. So tell me a little bit, like, what would be our ideal situation growing up?
Oh, I love that. I think the ideal situation would be, you're born into the world and there are some caretakers there who have the time, energy, resources to obviously, give you all the physical needs, make sure that you're safe physically, you're clothed, you have food and shelter, but also that they have the time and the steadiness in themselves and also the self-awareness in themselves to respond to your needs in a sensitive and timely way, whether, when you're crying and you can't communicate. And, we kind of, even though we don't have words at that point, we do experience distress. And so, and, nobody has to teach babies how to cry, that they're born knowing how to do that. And so when we cry and we are basically helpless and, are struggling with something like we don't know how to get food in our mouths, we are uncomfortable, feel sick, cold, etc., that there's somebody who comes and can be really effective and warm and nurturing and can troubleshoot effectively. And so if that happens, then there's a relationship that starts to be built where it's like, oh, the world's pretty good. I mean, sometimes things are stressful and it's not always comfortable, but here's somebody who can come and help me with that. And so it starts there. And if you continue that and into some consistency with the caretaking and, and as the child grows a little bit older and older in adjusting and adapting to the child's developmental needs, whatever culture you're in, I think this is across culture, that there is a relationship that is built that is the foundation of how a child sees him or herself and in the world. And so we want that to be a close, nurturing relationship where the child also feels really seen and safe. So if you have that consistently, I think that's what's, really ideal. And that could come from, a single parent, that could come from a family, extended family of caretakers. But you want, some consistency with the amount of care and with the faces that you're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. I knew that was going to be one of my next questions. It's like, does it have to be mom? Can it be multiple people? So it's really about that it's consistent, that the child is feeling like when I need something, generally my needs are met, I'm being cared for, I can rely on someone coming to take care of me.
Yes, yeah. And what's happening at that age is that the infancy to about maybe 2 or 3 years old is the brain is just very, very plastic, which means that we start life with all of these like pre-built, I would say, kind of these pre-built neurons that are there, but the neurons don't have connections. And so what learning is connecting those neurons. And then, and the way that we learn at that age is through relationship, through going, oh, here's somebody that I can interact with, I can see their face and there's aliveness, and there's nurturing, or there's soothing, and I learn from that. And so what you can learn at that age is about relationship. If that's really strong, then your brain ends up, having all these connections that are these like relational pathways that set you up for, more learning, and also kind of other nervous system effects that are good, that are really
Mm.
positive, developmental. And if that doesn't happen, or if it's not as reliable, and there's more stress around, then we lose those neurons. Like the brain literally just sort of kind of pares away, prunes away these neurons, because it's like, oh, we don't need these, you know?
Mm.
And so those early years are extremely important for this kind of learning, and being able to internalize and create these, richer worlds of emotional learning and relational learning.
Mm. I have so many questions. I'm wondering, like, there's a lot of parenting books on that are trying to tell, parents to kind of push child toward independence, right? To not needing. Can we do too much?
I want to say that I'm not a parenting expert, and I respect the people who do that work so much. But I'll give you my take on it. Is that, I mean, the point is independence, like eventually, but it's about timing. It's about being able to also scaffold it, or level the independence up little by little, so that it's not too stressful. It doesn't feel overwhelming, so that you're attuned to what the child can do, and you're providing enough support for them to encounter more and more independence, more and more complexity, and be able to do more for themselves.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's really about the timing and how early we push our little ones out to that independence. And I like that you use that word attunement. That's a word I hear a lot these days as well. Would you mind defining that for us?
Ooh, attunement. I'll give it my best shot. I think attunement has to do with the quality of understanding between two people. And it
Mm,
doesn't have to be a spoken understanding, but when we say that you're attuned to somebody, or you feel that somebody's really attuned to you, you feel that they get you, that they're with you, that you feel good and safe
mm.
with them.
Yeah, I love that. And that's so interesting because right when the child doesn't have words and they're crying, it's often hard to figure out like what they need. So I think sometimes when parents hear this stuff, they're like, "Oh no, did I give my child enough of I of what they would need for secure attachment?" And I wonder if you have any thoughts on how often does that caregiver have to get it right?
Yeah, it's definitely not 100% of the time getting it right.
Good to know.
And I don't know what that number is. I don't even know if it's in study. Often what we say is good enough,
Good
what is,
enough. Yeah, the good enough mom. Yeah,
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 what is good enough? I don't know if anybody has put a number to it,
yeah,
but I think that there's room for resiliency. I don't have a good answer for that, but we're aiming for good enough, and it's
yeah.
definitely not, you have to be there and do it all the time, because that would be so stressful. I don't think
Hmm.
people could really do that unless they were just even if you had all the time and resources. I don't know if it would be possible to do that.
So let's talk about the other side, like what happens when it goes wrong. So if we have early childhood trauma, something happens to that child. What does that look like later on as far as attachment style and relationships?
Yeah. This is when we're talking specifically about attachment styles, this is where you get into the insecure styles. So the anxious style, the avoidant style, and the disorganized style. And I would say that, what these styles are adaptations to the world and relationships and stress, based on what you learned when you were young, but also evolving as you encounter new experiences, but mainly what you learn when you were young. and what you were working with, basically. So if you had a parent that was, for example, pretty inconsistent. Like sometimes they were really great, and sometimes they were maybe like struggling with their own mental health and just couldn't really regulate themselves. Then you would experience, I think, some, internally some confusion with that, and some activation with that as a young child. As in, wait a minute, where are you? What's going on? And you may cry, you may protest. That behavior, that way of relating to unmet needs and stressors can carry on through into adulthood relationships. And so that's what we might call, an attachment style going from childhood one to an adult one. So that would be the anxious style. And let's say that you had a parent who, or a caretaker, that they were really good about meeting your physical needs, but when it came to your emotional needs, that was just regularly absent. You could say that was neglected, because maybe they don't really know how to deal with big emotions. Those parents, yeah, they're just really underdeveloped themselves when it comes to emotions. And so all they knew how to do was kind of shut down if there was a need that the child expressed that was like kind of inconvenient, or they didn't know or understand it. And let's say that you, as a child, your response to that was sort of like, okay, we're just going to wind down and shut down those needs so that they're not really stressful anymore. They're not going to distress me anymore, and because kind of erase them, right? So if that happens, then a child may actually appear really fine, that they're just kind of like, okay, no, well, life is good. I've got everything I need. Nothing's wrong here. There's nothing to see here. And that can carry forward into adulthood, and that would become an avoidant attachment style. And we say avoidant because not because these folks aren't stressed out, these babies aren't stressed out. When we look at actually, different tests, different physiological tests of stress, they're often pretty stressed out. Actually, they just don't know what to do with that, and so there's not really like a high level, top level awareness of anything to even do about that. So that's the avoidant attachment style. And then when it comes to the disorganized attachment style, the pattern usually is that, parent, caretaker who is just had a lot of trouble themselves with regulation, or they weren't safe. They responded in abusive or like pretty severely neglectful ways when with a child. And this makes it so that the parent, the person that the baby is finding shelter and getting their needs met with, isn't actually feel safe. It actually, that they creates states of terror and fear within the child. So they're still being taken care of by the parent, and they're probably very attached to the parent, as in they have that bond there, but it doesn't feel safe. And so that carries through to later on when I'm in relationships. It's scary. It's I'm fearful. I want to get close, but also I really don't, and it's going to freak me out, and it's going to terrify me, and so that can also happen, disorganized need style. And then I would also say that because that disorganization comes from these more like acute traumatic states, or trauma responses, you can also be secure or anxious or avoidant and still have pockets of disorganization or pockets of trauma where it's like, oh, triggered when I see or do, or somebody does this, or I'm reminded of something, then I go into that like severely dysregulated and not feeling safe kind of state too. That can also, I think, happen with disorganization, which is interesting to me, at least.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's like trying to think about it. We can feel like I was thinking about, like, I feel pretty securely attached, but there have definitely been times in my life, especially like earlier on, where exactly what you're describing. Like something would just set me off. And it's hard to explain, right? In relationship where, because I was thinking about this too. It's like, how do you know if you're having a kind of normal or appropriate reaction, emotional reaction to someone, maybe a significant other who's not coming through for you in a certain way, right? I imagine that just because you're securely attached doesn't mean that you don't have emotional reactions to these kind of things. So I don't know, maybe you could provide some insight, like how do we know if we're having emotional reaction or if it's our attachment style that's suddenly like playing itself out and we're really reacting to someone who left us in childhood.
Hmm. Yeah. And Laura, you're talking about trauma, right? Like if we're reacting to trauma.
Yeah, I'm wondering like if exactly like if something happens with a partner, let's say they didn't show up for us the way that we wanted. I suppose even if we had a secure attachment style and a great childhood and so forth, we might get upset, right? We as emotional beings, but maybe we would be able to be, in that relationship, express our feelings, have our emotions, but maybe remain within maybe a certain window or be able to regulate ourselves or to trust our partner when they apologize, maybe to accept that apology and so forth. So it's not that we would be like without emotion. Whereas maybe the same instance of being, disappointed by a partner, had we had a childhood trauma, which left us with an insecure attachment, we might have a different reaction to that.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, so here's the thought on that is that and of course, like even if you are securely attached and you got a fairly optimal situation when you were brought up, you are still gonna get upset. Things are still gonna happen that are gonna be really upsetting because it's not a perfect world, and it's like people are going to make mistakes or they're going to do things that don't align with our needs or interests. And so I think, yeah, so emotions, right? Very, very normal, very, very healthy to be able to have and feel and express. And I think maybe the difference is when you have something more of a trauma reaction, what I've noticed is that people, they have more of a story around that. Where if you can tack on, it feels like, and then, you can sort of feel into the situation and describe something like, when I hear people say, well, something happened, I don't like it, I don't like what you did, but then they can say something like, it feels like you don't care about me, or it feels like you're gonna just abandon me, or it feels like you want to punish me, or it feels like you just have to be right all the time, something like that. Is that there's something there, some kind of shadow experience there that is coming through, that's just pushing up, and that's how it's coming out. And people say things like that because that's what they feel, that's what their experience is like in that, and what's really alive in that moment. And of course, when they say things like this, the instigate a lot of defensiveness, and the other person can go, "That's not what I meant," or "I can't believe you think that about me," etc.
Yes. And maybe there's this way we're like playing out, right? These cycles of like these relationship cycles and wanting, like we were saying earlier, we want that social connection, we want that closeness. But if that closeness feels also unsafe or scary, or if we think that person might leave, perhaps we're kind of causing that to happen in our reactions
Hmm.
so that we push them to leave before they can leave themselves.
Hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of with the insecure attachment styles, so the behavior that stems from them makes it a little bit of like a self-reinforcing or self-fulfilling prophecy, where yeah, if you're anxious and your behavior is when you get triggered and feel like you're going to get abandoned, your behavior is to really kind of go overboard and just do too much, say too much, then if there's not really attention called to that and that's not handled relationally and understood, then it can cause the other person to go, this is too much, and that can feel like more of an abandonment. And also conversely, if you have avoidant attachment, and your pattern is that you're not really aware that you even have needs, and you're not going to really say anything about that. You're going to say if you're upset by something, or if you didn't quite prefer the way that a decision was handled, and you're not going to say anything, then you're going to get neglected. Your needs are automatically just not going to be part of the equation because you're not an effective advocate for them.
Mm, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Are there certain attachment styles that seem to do people tend to pair certain ways?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think we talk a lot about the avoidant and anxious pairing.
Mm,
um, we talk a lot about that because I think that it just is very apparent. It's very obvious when you have that, because one of the styles triggers the other so much, and vice versa, and they seem to just be this the bite that fits the wound. And so and also I think that pairing, because they're so polarizing, you don't have to have a big delta between them for it to be an issue. Yeah. So it's like, let's say we're both pretty secure, right? I have some anxious tendencies and you have some avoidant tendencies. Actually, most things are pretty good, but because, we have some of those tendencies when things are stressful, they can erupt, and then they can be exacerbated because especially if they're not managed, these differences are not managed, and then it feels like we have a big issue and that we have this big delta between us, when in fact it may not be that big.
that's such a good point. We talk a lot about the trauma response as having this big impact on our boundaries and our sense of boundaries between us. Um, and I'm just thinking about that as you're talking about this. I don't know where the question's going exactly, but I'm just thinking about that, like that enmeshment we can have, and the way that sometimes when we survive trauma, we cling to people to save us, or to be the person that changes it for us. I wonder if you have any reactions to that, or just can relate to how that shows up in relationships and attachment styles.
I think a lot of this, some of this is somewhat outside of the scope of attachment theory. In the most classic sense, attachment theory is kind of really about stress and separation and reunion in relationships. But in my newest book, I Want to Connect, what I talk about is the attachment foundation. So, and that's, I think, a little bit broader. And that I think it includes a lot of the things that you're talking about. And what that is were you brought up in a way where you got to experience these really healthy, nurturing relationships in a consistent way, and that took care of your emotional needs and your emotional development? And if you did, then you probably came into adulthood with a pretty good sense and ability to feel your feelings, to know and have your boundaries, and to kind of know your wants as well. Because what you probably got is somebody who was a caretaker, who was able to be with you and also allow you to explore yourself, and even did a good job of maybe reflecting that, such that you had a little bit more of a solid sense of self. And when we don't get that, then we get into, more insecure attachment. And I think, like, related to that comes like the not as solid sense of self, and sense of, I mean, I may be very smart, I may be very, very successful, and maybe even be able to navigate, social ties and network really well. And, I can talk, I can be very persuasive and charming. You can be all these things, but when it comes to, okay, the self and how much it feels like is there, and so that I don't need somebody to validate or make me feel very real. Basically, I think that boundaries has a lot to do with that. So I think it's boundaries, feelings, and wants that are kind of the really core trifecta that makes up, do I know these things about myself? Am I in touch with these things? And if so, I think that's a pretty strong position to be in. And if not, then yeah, it's going to cause a lot more, I think, internal distress and ways of trying to get those things, strategies for getting those things that aren't, always so effective.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up your new book because and it's called I Want to Connect. I was amazed, Annie. I was really impressed by how many different concepts you're bringing together, theoretical approaches and concepts. I really love the practices in this book. And, there's a lot of work on nervous system. There is, it's relational, but also really the questions to ask yourself, how to check in with yourself. I love the body scan. That's one that we're just always talking about in my work. So I definitely want to talk about some of the things that you've sort of added in this next layer of your work. Before we do that, just to kind of wrap up, pure attachment, I'm just curious if people want to dig into that further, if they want to understand their own attachment style, what do you suggest? And do people's attachment styles change? Can they change throughout life? What do you say to that?
Right. Absolutely. For people who are interested in attachment and learning more about their attachment patterns or attachment style, I think there are so many, really good resources out there, from sort of like more casual learning and understanding, like on TikTok. I think there are some great people who talk about these. It would be great to have a list. I don't have a list off the top of my head, but I have seen some really good content out there, and books, workbooks. Those are also really wonderful resources. And then you have the level of going to a therapist or doing couples therapy, which I think can be really amazing way to dive in deep and get more specific about, okay, where is this showing up in your relationship or in your behaviors. Yeah, and I think the more we talk about it, the more it grows in our awareness, and something that it becomes just something that we know about ourselves and we can normalize.
Yeah, and I'll shout out your attachment theory workbook as a great resource because I've been going through the questions in there. And, a lot of times when I do these kind of books or read these books, I don't actually fill them in. But with yours, I've been very good. I've been actually writing down my responses. And I know that when I write things down, it has like such a bigger impact. It's just so powerful to write down, to journal, to reflect in written word.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for saying that, Lara. Yeah, I'm really glad that it's been something that you could use. I've gotten a lot of feedback, great feedback from all around the world, from people, and it just like touches me so much. And I'm so glad that people are connecting with their, attachments through the book.
Yeah, I'm really doing my quizzes, and it's a great workbook. Like I said, a lot of times I'll just I'll read those things. I'll be like, oh, I don't want to write in it because I want to share with someone. I'm like, no, this is mine. I am doing this, and I'm really reflecting on my life and my patterns, and that's beautiful. And I think it's very valuable for all of us just to have that little like voice in the back of our minds when we're having the inevitable, conflict that comes up in relationships and interactions, whether it's an intimate partner or friendship, that there's just that little extra awareness that can kind of observer that can look at it like, am I going into my thing right now? My thing, my fears, my patterns, and can just watch. You can just watch what's happening with a little bit more spaciousness around the nervous system activation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that the second book you mentioned, the one that's coming out in May, and you can pre-order it right now if you want on Amazon, is called "I Want to Connect." And you're right, Laura. It does go through kind of a lot of different concepts, and even in polyvagal theory. And my goal with that was to lay things out in a really simple way, and so you're not going to get, like a academic version of these concepts, when it comes to like regulation, co-regulation, polyvagal theory. What I really wanted was to make it accessible as much as possible. So I do think that it's a little bit more conceptual or advanced than the first book. But I also think that it has a lot more to add as far as like, when people are actually trying to figure out, how do I become more securely attached? How do I strengthen my attachment foundation? It's just, it can be more powerful.
Tell us about, maybe we can pick a few of the theories or concepts or exercises that you recommend in the book. I don't know if there's certain ones that are sticking out for you. I know the body scan and the diaphragmatic breathing is in that book. I was curious. I think you do in the beginning talk about, if you do have a history of trauma, to be gentle with these practices.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. The idea is to encourage everybody to be able to tune in to what is going on in their nervous system, in their autonomic nervous system, and make it as simple as possible, to so that people can start to really have some words and language to describe that. And so the first part of the book is concepts and laying out the foundation. And so I talk about, what is trauma, and how does it relate to, early development, and what is regulation, what is co-regulation, what is dysregulation, and what are we trying to do with all of that, what is the goal. And so I lay all that down out. And then in the second part of the book, it's really about supporting regulation. Okay, yeah, when it comes to how you might use these exercises, and there's just handfuls of exercises in the book. I think there's 37 or so total. And so the regulation exercises are just, they're just kind of like a sampling, right? I mean, there's so many ways that I think we can regulate. Some people dance, some people go take a walk in the park, some people juggle. So, but the point is okay, here's some things to try that are, often recognized or recommended, and then actually do them, and then tune in and figure out, can you feel something shift? If so, that awareness is so important. And yeah, so that's supporting regulation. And then included in that part is also, the section about how to just sort of tune into your wants and desires, your boundaries and your feelings, because that also supports regulation. And then the third part is this is what I think I'm so passionate about, and it's more about my work, is how to develop the skills in relationship that are going to support you to have a better experience in those relationships, and actually be able to handle more complexity, and also just support you and others to feel more safety and feel more connection in relationship. So that's a little bit of a breakdown of the book.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Maybe I can ask you for just a few questions to go a little deeper. I love the recommendation for really tracking like what works for you for your nervous system. I think, as you put it so eloquently, there are so many different practices. Some more embodied, some more cognitive, and different ones work for different people. So it's really tracking, like, I felt this, I did this, it worked. What happened. I think for a lot of people, something blocks us from doing it, or doing the thing that works when we're feeling dysregulated. We might know that taking a break, taking a walk, doing some breathing is gonna make us feel better, but it's so hard to get us to do it. I know this is a tricky one, but any thoughts on how to get better at doing the things we know work?
Mhm. Ooh.
It's a hard one, right?
I love that. That is the $1 million question. Absolutely. Because we can know so many things, but putting into practice is the tricky part. Here's one take on that, and I think this is aligned with some of the things I talk about in the book, is can you track and can you clock your own nervous system dysregulation? Because, I talk about, let's just sort of like laying out some different states that your nervous system can be in, and what are the clues that is what's going on. Everything from the kind of the home base state of calm and connected to, there's agitation, and then there's a fight flight, and then there's freeze, withdrawal, etc. One foundation is, can you clock what state your nervous system is in right now? Because oftentimes when we don't want to do the thing, it might be because there's agitation there, or even more activation, or we're in a freeze response or withdrawal response. I find that, like, being able to yeah, so then those states can often be work against logic and work against the things that we know, right? And so it's really a different brain that is operating in those states. Right. So, yeah, so that's why it's, when we are feeling pretty calm and connected, it's easy to do those things. It's like, oh, we want to do those things because they're good for us, right? But when we're in these other states, it's a whole different story. It's a different ball game. And I think that just knowing that, having the awareness of that, it can play a role in, outsmarting ourselves.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
yeah.
I love
Right.
this. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's really landing. Yeah, go on.
For example, I've worked with people where certain of these stress states just feel normal to them. It's just this, like, oh, yeah, I mean, this is just me, right? I am just lazy. I just don't do the things that are good for me, et cetera, et cetera. If they can understand that, oh, this isn't, just me. This is a version of me when my nervous system believes that there is stress and threat, and it is responding in this frozen way, or in this, like, state of agitation, because it's preparing and vigilant of what could come. And so just knowing that, I think, can depersonalize it and make it go, oh, and make you kind of go, oh, okay, let me introduce something new to for my nervous system to experience, so that I can help it, kind of move away from this stress and threat and towards something that feels a little bit more safe.
That that was great. Annie, and that $1 million question and that tough one I threw at you. That's really landing for me. A few things that are landing are, something that we say in yoga and meditation is, like, really practice when things are good. So it's a normal, habit and tendency when things aren't good. I mean, it's easier. If you just wait for when things are tough, it's harder to do those practices. But if they're a part of your life when things are good, then you kind of they're all that habit's already in there. But I love also what you're saying about noting, just going, oh, that's my other brain, can just create enough of that space and maybe compassion to try something,
Hmm.
to get us out of it. So that's
Totally.
a gem right there. Thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah. And yoga, man, so many amazing, insights and wisdom from that lineage, that tradition. All of these wisdom traditions are just amazing, and you're just learning to say them in a different way, as we
Hmm.
learn about neuroscience and all these things. I mean, one of I think the things about yoga is that the rest, or the non-action, is just as important as the action, right?
Hmm.
Yes. And so that is like a core thing that I explore in this new book is, can you get back to, calm and connect? Can you tether there? Can you go from, basically being activated and then back into calm and connected? And yeah, so all of this ancient wisdom. And when it comes to relationships, I just really have to shout out that, my main inspiration is just a lot of indigenous cultures where relationships are the foundation that they're what's central in a lot of cultures. And I think there's so much wisdom in that. And it's just something that we need to get back to.
Yeah, that's super important. And yeah, as we're coming to the close of the hour, you mentioned that last part of your book and how to get more skillful at our relationships is so important to you. Is there one final tidbit, a bit of advice, a practice? I think we all would like to get better at our relationships. Is there one little bit of advice you might offer us as a place to start?
Yeah, I think my tidbit is to remember that these skills are learnable, that if and that when you learn them, it makes relationships easier. It makes it so you're able to face more difficult moments with more ease and confidence. And so yeah, that first they're learnable. It's not just you're born with it or you're not, or you either got lucky when you were young or you didn't. I find that it's the got lucky, had secure attachment is really just, oh, you were set up to be able to learn and practice these skills more. And that's why, you do it better. And so when it comes to the rest of us, I would say that we're so fortunate. It's really about, okay, how do we set ourselves up, and how do we kind of lead ourselves or get help in that process so that we can collaborate better, that we can find that it's enjoyable to do, that that we can have hard talks because there are opportunities for us to be seen and to see others and to create that relationship and connection. And so those are the things that the last part, those skills building part of the book focuses on. I don't know. I think they're all kind of important. I think some of there's one that comes to mind is the yes and principle, which is really popular, is one of the core things of improv, and where it's about when somebody makes a scene to yes and to not negate what they're proposing because it's all improvised. It's to respond to it and to build on it. And I think that is something that I find myself sort of going back to and working with people around a lot, is to, okay, how to build on it, how to create more complexity rather than collapse it.
I love that one. And I came from a theater training background, so I appreciate it. You never cut someone off in an improv by saying, no, that just ends the scene, right? So, yeah, embracing others' truths, right? And then adding our own. I think like walking towards those hard conversations, what a beautiful thing if we can do that, if we can work on that for ourselves, how much change we can make in our society, just relationship by relationship. And it's just a beautiful gift that we can give ourselves and give the world. So I really thank you for your work.
Oh, thank you so much, Lara. Thank you for having me on your podcast. It was such a pleasure. And wow, yeah, I feel so positive about putting this out there and sharing it with you.
Oh, well, very, very excited to see your next book out there, which I blurbed for. That's how much I believe in it. Let's shout out where people can find you. Is it at changeinsight.net?
Actually, so where people can find me, my website is anniechen.net.
Okay. AnnieChen.net. Good. So I'm glad I asked you. They should get your new book, which is on pre-order now. I want to connect and definitely get your other book, the Attachment Theory Workbook. Annie, thank you so, so much for chatting with me today.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
As we buzz around the busy world, it becomes clear there are billions of paths. As we buzz around the busy world, we will appear in other people's photographs. As we speed through the centuries, we will collide and the light will bend. we will be accidentally immortalized in someone else's land.